map. You might have 3 different Pulse Deploy kits that you create, right? 3 different accounts, 3 kits. Now, Pulse Deploy is then designed, you'll see it says it needs admin privileges. Okay. What Pulse Deploy is then designed to do is to automate the entire deployment phase for the online backup app. So I don't know if you can see that. What it's doing is it's sucking down the SOS client. It's actually popped up on my machine. Do I want to install this? I'm hitting no, so get a little error there. Click yes to all. And so it sucks down the online backup client from the cloud, installs that, then pulls down the Pulse client from the cloud, installs that, and then logs in with the username and password. And at that point, we have what we call a deployment. And that's something that makes more sense when we flip across to the actual Pulse web application, which I'm now going to do. So at this point, we've now deployed. You saw how simple it was, right? So we've now, at this point, we've actually installed SOS, or your brand. We've installed Pulse. We've registered an account on the machine. We've set up a backup set. We've set up a backup schedule. And it did all that in the background. Now, if you'd done that over the command line, there wouldn't have even been any UI interface at all on this particular machine. So, on Wednesday, you're applying the patches that have come out yesterday. On Patch Tuesday, you just drop Pulse Deploy into your patch management software. That'll push it out over the network and deploy the backup to all those machines. We got a question here. Will this work with LogMe and Rescue? Yes, Jim. No reason it wouldn't work with LogMe and Rescue. And that shouldn't need any custom integration. Actually, it should just work with LogMe and Rescue out of the box. Okay, so let's flip across and look at the web application. Okay, so so this is the interface I get when I log into Pulse. I know it's a little bit small. I'll just try zooming in on my browser. Might mess with the user interface a little bit, but hopefully that's clear enough on your screen to be able to see the details. So when I'm in Pulse, again, Pulse is deployed where you've got your own server. So that does a few things. Firstly, from a security standpoint, it means that your Pulse environment is yours and not shared with anybody else. Secondly, from a scalability standpoint, you've got no issues with scalability on Pulse. You've got dedicated infrastructure. Thirdly, in the future, we might open it up so that you can actually host Pulse yourself on your own infrastructure. That's not available today, but it is something we'd like to explore in the future. We've got a comment here saying that all they can see is Chrome. Hopefully within Chrome you can see a website that says SOS Pulse, Centralized Management, Reporting and Deployment. So hopefully that's coming through. Across the top here, this menu, sort of working left to right, is probably the best way for me to walk through the app. Pulse users, this is simply your access control for Pulse itself. So obviously you're going to have at least one Pulse user in your environment, but you might have a Pulse user created for every one of your techs. That would be a pretty common sort of scenario. So you can have access control to Pulse, and then if those techs leave your employment, then you can disable their access to Pulse. Remembering that Pulse is a very powerful system that goes out and is then dealing usually with your client's infrastructure. So security on Pulse is pretty important. We can have an unlimited number of Pulse users. So you can create as many Pulse accounts as you need to per server. But really, everything in the SOS universe comes back to a backup account. So I'm going to drill in here and I'm going to look at my backup accounts, and you can see here there's 30 accounts that I'm running with this particular Pulse instance. So here's all my Pulse data. Obviously, this test entity and test CTC, you've all got your entity codes and your CTC codes. These are, this is on the test deployment that we're running this demo off. And we start to see some of these other links here into other objects, client deployment, events, and backup sessions. And these are going to be pretty important as we're using Pulse. So let's look through that. But the next one I want to move to is looking at client machines. So out of the box, I've got a lot of information on the client machines. You can see all the machines here I'm managing with this Pulse box. You can see what OSs they're running them. I've got a mix of Win 7 Pro, 32, and 64 here. I've got an XP box. The bit level of the OS, which can often be important. You can see when we install. We can see where the product's installed. You notice different parts here. For you, this is going to show up as your branded product. So, Derek, one of the examples from the...
So we have Well, not to name out anyone, but like Acme Online Backup or...
Right, okay. So it's going to show up there. That would be the actual path of your rebranded product tool. Same with the logs path, which you'll notice in different places. So on WinXP, logs are here, but on Win7, it's in a different place. Backup agent logs path, the version of the backup agent that the customer is running, which is very important, and then where the customer is located. So little information there. Now, over time, this information, we'll be able to drill in and get a lot more information here. For now, we've got all that basic metadata, but we'll be expanding this significantly. You'll be able to get trace logs on processor utilization, memory utilization. You'll be able to get metadata about available fixed disks and resources on those fixed disks. So we're really building out the machine details functionality of the Pulse framework to be a full-blown management tool, so that you can use it to manage your online backup technology, but you could use it to manage your pretty much anything else. So the machine, client machines and this whole machine infrastructure, this is an area of Pulse you're going to see move pretty rapidly. But then deployments. Deployments is really the heart and soul of the Pulse system. And a deployment is a slightly fuzzy concept. Deployment is a username on a machine. So if you remember that with the SOS accounts, you can install multiple accounts on a machine. So if I've got a server and I've got 3 accounts running on it, I have 3 deployments. Going back to that earlier scenario where I have 100 PCs, let's say I've got 2 different accounts that I want to deploy on every machine, right? An account for the individual user where he can log in and use it, and then my Pulse account. Well, I've got 2 accounts, I've got 100 machines, but now I have 200 deployments. I hope that makes sense. So that we actually control on the deployment level. So in this particular view, you saw on that previous screen I had about 8 machines that I was managing. But if I expand this, you'll see I've got 40 deployments on those 8 machines. So I've got a lot of accounts. And this is important because this gives you the flexibility to be running multiple policies per box. So if you've got a policy that says backup X data daily, whereas you want to back up this other data on a weekly schedule, you can do that. Also, I mean, just looking at the metadata available here on a deployment basis, probably one of the most important things here is which backup policy is applied. You can see not all my policies, I beg your pardon, not all my deployments are running a policy. That's instructive because what that emphasizes is the fact you can use Pulse to give you analytics and data and health monitoring on a machine, but you don't have to be using the remote control capability. So you can use Pulse to deploy and report, but you don't have to use control. In this case, I've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 deployments that are using policies. And then we're going to look at some of these other things here. And you can see I can see it by client machine or by backup account. Everything, wherever there's relationships between objects, I can filter so I can look at a particular box. For example, I've had an issue there with John's PC. So I'm running it here on our local network instance, which is why I can't connect to that right now. So then so events. So the core of the Pulse system is really the event type and the different event types that Pulse can handle. So under the hood, there are 14 event types that Pulse is savvy to. And you can see those just by looking at view event types. And this will be extending over time, and we'll be taking requests from partners for the event types to support. What you'll notice is an event type, there's different metadata associated with an event type itself. So, for example, the event type category, error level, application, and location. These are all important as you're designing your own reports. So categories are deployment, backup, management, and config. Error levels are 0 for informational events, 1 for warnings, and 2 for fatal error conditions. And then obviously the different applications in the SOS world. So, for example, if you look at we'll just go top to bottom. You can see client software installed. Well, that's an informational event that is born or is raised from the PC client application, and it's I said informational error level 0, and it's in the deployment category. Whereas if I look at, say, server policy applied to client, again, it's informational, but it's a management event, and it's originating on the PC client. Or the ones that, for example, I think most of our partners are interested in, scheduled backup ran with errors. So you'll see it's a warning event. This was a tough call we had to make as to whether or not a scheduled backup that ran with errors was a fatal error condition or a warning. We went with warning because in most cases, 99% of your backup will run. You might have a couple of errors. So it's a warning, ran on the client. But if, for example, a backup failed to run, scheduled backup failed to run, you'll see that's a fatal error condition, so error level 2. Now, you don't have to understand all of these, all these different error levels or categories. There's a whole bunch of pre-baked reports, and we'll add reports on request from partners. But for those of you who want to design your own reports, understanding the underlying object model gives you a lot of power in the way that you can slice and dice this data in your own custom reports. Any questions so far? We've got a relatively quiet audience today, which I was expecting it to be a raucous bunch. All right, well, if there are any questions, please do ask them. Otherwise, we'll keep piling along. So under the events and reports category, the most sort of macro level report is just to view all events, and I can sort that and cross-reference or filter it. So for example, if I drill into, well, it's a pretty boring event. It's just a backup that ran. But look, let's filter by a drop-down. So if we look at, so if I want to see the events, scheduled backup ran with errors. So let's have a look at that. All right, I got one event happened on Rich's PC. Some of you might know Rich Valdemar. On this account, backup that ran with errors. Or let's look at backups that failed to run. Okay, so again, Rich's PC. So somebody should go and look at what's happening on Rich's box. So an online backup was scheduled and failed to run here. Now, there's actually a lot of very granular data available under the hood. So if we look here at just this is the backup session report, and I can see when a backup started, when a backup finished, how many files were transferred, how many errors occurred in a given backup. So sorting on that column is a very powerful way. So now, so you can see here of I got 25 pages, so I got 250 backup sessions logged on this Pulse server, but only these 4 had any problems. So now as an administrator, I can, sorry, not these 4, these 8. I can rapidly see where I've got my problems. Now, one of the other things you'll notice here is the number of files that were unchanged. And if I want to drill in, I can actually get the detailed log. You can see here that there's not much of a log. But then I can actually go one level more detailed if I really want to drill in and see file level session details. So this is actually the data from the PC client at the end of the backup. So this is getting really granular, but this shows you every single file that was considered in the backup session. So this is data that's come from the actual client machine itself that was being backed up. So when the backup ran, it looked at these files. So whatever your selection was, SOS decided that these files matched the selection, so you can check that. It shows you the last time they were successfully backed up. It also shows you the last time they were modified on that PC. So you can really start to slice and dice this data. For example, if you want to look at, okay, all the files that SOS skipped because they hadn't changed, you can get that report. If you want to look at all the files that, I can group my data. So if I want to group by last backup date, for example, I can just drag and drop and group my data by last backup date. So we've got extremely